So when the cells become resistant to insulin, where is all that food going? The carbs, the protein, and the fats, because you've got your macros. So is the
Yep.
body storing all of it as fat, or what is it doing? And does it matter what the macro is?
I think the macro composition is the most important thing, whether it's for health, for weight loss, all of it. Um, and let's break down the three components. First, let's start with protein because protein is really not used as a fuel unless it needs to be. Okay, so protein is this amino acid group that is really kind of the building blocks for our body. If you think about protein, your body is constantly in need of protein every single day. You've got hair, nails, skin, you know, autophagy, which is a cellular, breakdown of cells, build new cells back up. All of this requires daily need of amino acids. And, building muscle, if you're trying to build and strength train, you need this constant supply of amino acids, and the body is going to preferentially use those proteins for those building blocks to do all those things. Um, and so it only takes the protein and turns it into gluconeogenesis, when the body needs more glucose. Okay. So if you're eating like a carnivore zero carb diet, your body still needs some glucose every day. Your red blood cells have no mitochondria, so they can only run on glucose. And some brain neurons, there's a certain amount of glucose that's still needed every day. So your body will take some of that protein you're eating, if you're eating zero carb, and turn it into glucose to supply the body with that normal glucose level that it needs. It's really about more of a demand driven process of, if I need some, I'm gonna turn some in to glucose. So that leaves you with carbohydrates and fat. That's all that's left really from the macros, and those are your fuels. Okay, but there's a really interesting process in the body where carbohydrates and fat, when they're eaten together, the body prioritizes one over the other. And this is something called the Randall cycle. This is where, and there's been some really good studies on this, where they actually mark the carbohydrates and fats and see what's being oxidized or burned in the body. And so what they did was they varied the carbohydrate. All they did was vary the carbohydrates up and down in the diet, and saw what was being oxidized. And the more carbohydrates you had, the less fats were getting oxidized in the body. The less carbohydrates you had, the more fat gets oxidized in the body. So really, carbohydrates just displace fat from being burned. Okay, so let's go back to that meal. Let's say you have a meal with protein and then some carbs and fat in it. Say the carbs and fat are both pretty high. Your body has a certain energy need at that moment. And if you're sitting on the couch, it's not a lot. Your entire blood volume is, if you include all the glucose, free fatty acids, ketones, it's maybe 80 calories that are in your entire blood volume at that moment. So you eat a meal of 800 calories. It's a lot of energy coming in that the body has to deal with, and it prioritizes it. And the way it prioritizes it is really in the reverse order of capacity. So how much capacity do you have on your body for glucose? It's like 1,500 to 2,000 calories stored in your muscle and liver as glycogen. How much do you have for fat? Theoretically, almost unlimited. Somebody like Tyler I just talked about, he's got millions of calories of fat stored on his body. So the body's going to prioritize, and you can also look at it as reverse order of toxicity. Because, while nobody wants high fat in the blood, high triglycerides, high glucose can kill you. If it gets up too high, 84 milligrams per deciliter is a normal amount. That's like 1 teaspoon of sugar in your entire blood volume. So you eat that flurry with 60 teaspoons of sugar in it or something, the body's, that could kill you if it didn't control that rapidly.
Right.
And so really what happens is it displaces the fat. So the high carb, high fat meal, almost all that fat is just going to get stored away in your fat cells while it deals with the high glucose, burns the glucose, stores the glucose, because that is the priority. That's the thing that could kill you.
That makes sense. And that's why I talk a lot about the fact that you want a lot of muscle on your body, because it absorbs that extra carb. You can actually eat more carbs if you have more muscle, right?
Exactly.
So it's kind of that carb sponge. But what I've noticed for for me personally, I do better on a lower fat, higher carb, still prioritizing protein. And some people, the opposite. They do better on the high fat, low carb, but you don't want both. That's where you get
Exactly.
in danger, right? And that's where all of the processed foods come in because they've got tons of fat and tons of carbs together. And it's like this bomb that tells your brain, oh my gosh, I love this. This is better than cocaine. I want more, more,
Yeah.
more. And you then start getting insulin resistance and all of these diseases that explode at an exponential rate. And so processed foods have completely derailed our society. Our parents did not have the rates of insulin resistance that we have today. And it never happened in children. I remember growing up,
Wow.
type 2 diabetes was called adult onset diabetes because it was never found in children. And then they had to change the name to type 2 because it's now affecting the children.
Yeah.
So with that being said, what's so interesting is most doctors and even functional doctors do not test insulin levels. They only test the
Yeah.
A1C and the blood sugar, which only tells you part of the story. It's just like when the doctors only
Exactly.
test T4, TSH for thyroid, they're not testing the real numbers, the complete panel that shows the full picture.